So, as you all know, the Monark initiative wants to empower student and junior developers to build on Web3 through hands-on projects. So, as part of this mission, we're hosting expert interviews to provide our builders with valuable insights. So, the goal of these sessions is to help our student teams and developers build more efficiently, avoid common mistakes, and gain inspiration from those shaping the industry. So, today's guest is Professor Jeremy Clark, Associate Professor at Concordia University's Institute for Information Systems Engineering and holder of the RCGT Catallaxy Industrial Research Chair in Blockchain Technologies. A gold medal graduate from the University of Waterloo, his doctoral work pioneered Scantegrity, the first cryptographically verifiable voting systems used in public elections. Professor Clark is a co-author of some of the earliest academic research on Bitcoin, contributor to the first blockchain textbook, and has advised municipalities and informed policy by testifying before Canadian Senate and House committees on digital currencies. So thank you so much, Jeremy, for joining us today. I think your insight will be very valuable for our community. So before starting with the list of questions, maybe you can just introduce yourself a little bit, maybe add some stuff I haven't mentioned. And yeah.
Sure. Yeah, so as you mentioned, I'm a professor at Concordia. I started working on blockchain relatively early, I'd say like 2011, 2012. We had a paper in 2012 about Bitcoin, one of the first Bitcoin papers. And then at the time, I was working on other areas of cryptography, so applying crypto to like voting systems. That was the particular thing that I worked on. And but then Bitcoin became very popular. Then blockchain, Ethereum, and all of that type of stuff followed. And so nowadays, I spend maybe 95% of my time like working just on blockchain stuff.
All right. So let's dive in. So first, maybe some questions about like Web3 vision and values. So what are the values of the whole Web3 ecosystem that you like the most and why?
Yes. First, I should say as an academic, I study it because it's interesting. We try to remain neutral. We're not like advocating or criticizing the space. We sort of evaluate it because people are using it. So it's more of a positive view than a normative view. That said, I probably wouldn't have spent, 10 years plus working on the space if I didn't think there was, some value to it. And so, yeah, so I the core like kind of principle is just this idea of, most people will say decentralized. I like to say permissionless. So like the idea of it's an open system, anyone can use it. It runs autonomously to some extent. There's different levels of like how autonomous, the services are and that type of thing. But I just think it's an interesting space, especially to experiment with, to see like what kinds of financial services, for example, could run in that setting. They may not replace traditional finance, but I think they'll always be there as an alternative. In traditional finance, there's always 10 ways of sort of doing the same kind of thing, and blockchain's an 11th way. But it's definitely like a completely different model. And so it's just interested to see sort of how it plays out.
Yeah. And where do you see the space like in 5 to 10 years? Like how do you see blockchain technology integrated in our life?
I'm not sure about that. So, there's the answer that like people are expecting you to say. And I said those answers like that it's going to become more integrated and more popular and that type of thing. But it honestly is something that I've repeated since 2011. And, 5 years have gone by and it's still like kind of, people like every day people aren't really using it. And so I don't know like when it will like hit that sort of critical mass. And a lot of people now are interested in investing. So that's changed a lot, like the idea of investing in Bitcoin, but still like do everyday people, have MetaMask installed and are using like Web3 products on a day-to-day basis. I think we're still a ways off. So I don't know if that happens in 5 years. I don't know if it happens in 10. I don't know if it doesn't happen the way we think it will, like if it sort of sneaks more into the background of things. Anyways, the future is always hard to predict. And so, yeah, I'm not sure.
Are there any specific things that you think that is missing in this industry to bring that adoption, basically?
Yeah, I think there's work to be done. First off, you need a regulatory environment where, industry's not scared to get involved and they're not worried about like friction down the road. And so I think we we definitely haven't had that in most countries, over the last 15 years. So that's one area. I think the user experience is still a little tough, especially with like people having to manage their own keys and self custody, and you lose your keys, all your money's gone, and that type of thing. So I think that's a little difficult. And then because transactions are kind of irreversible, if you do fall victim to fraud, right, then there's not a great recourse for you. Sometimes there's little things that you can do, but generally you're going to lose everything. And so that's also very different than the typical financial environment that we operate in with like consumer protection laws and things like that. And so so that's why I think it hasn't really reached the mainstream. Or if it did reach the mainstream, then I think we would see like fraud like go up even more and just be completely off the charts. And so those are issues that there are people working on solutions. There's also sorts of clever stuff now, especially like using kind of like email as your authentication loop, and then having some like zero knowledge proofs on the chain that kind of verify that you received emails and things like that. So I think it's a space that could get solved. But that's definitely one of the things I see holding it back.
And looking back during all the years that you worked in this space, like, is there any like key lessons that you've learned that you would want to share?
Key lessons. Yeah, I don't know. Like I see a lot of, we always go through these sort of hype cycles where there's, a lot of hype about things. And then, but yeah, there's not really a lesson there necessarily. It's just that, you can't believe everything that you read. But there are lots of uses of blockchain that are interesting, and that people have found ways to use, and the whole DeFi space is interesting.
And now that you've worked in this space for a long time, like, is there any specific protocol that you prefer or you like to build on, and why?
Sure. So so in the early days we did Bitcoin. It was the most prominent. Ethereum came out. At first, I was a little skeptical of Ethereum. I'm not sure why, but then I started seeing my colleagues use it, and I sort of got on board. And now I have no like personal care. Like I don't care. It's and I work a lot with students, so it's sort of what the students want. But I always encourage them to consider Ethereum first, just because the developer tools are really great. The documentation is great. It's by far the easiest thing to get into. If you start working with like, chains that, the documentation's maybe missing, or there's gaps in it, or like the tools are okay, but like when you go to use them, there's all these dependencies, you can't get them working and things like that. And so you don't want to waste your time with all that kind of stuff. You want to just do the research. So I think myself, like most of the researchers, like I'd say like 80% of research is probably Ethereum based. There's still maybe a 15% that's working on Bitcoin. And then the other 5% are working on other stuff. I should say there is also like a big contingency that works on permissioned blockchains like Fabric, Hyperledger Fabric, including IBM researchers. Like they're big in that space, and so they're part of that pie as well. But like Ethereum is dominant, lots of Fabric, bit of Bitcoin, and then it's a long tail of other kinds of stuff.
Yeah. And just speculating here, like, do you think in the long run, Ethereum will win the race of adoption, even though it's not the fastest or not have like all these performance things? Just the fact that there's so much network effect, so much research done on it. Like, do you think it will become like the dominant network people are building on, or at least all the EVM standards is going to become the standard?
Yeah, it's hard to say. Again, predicting the future is really hard, and you don't really know. But what the points that you raised are the same points that I would like use to try and weigh the scales, right? So it has a huge dominant like network effect. There's a lot of value on it. There's a lot of tokens that are already on it, and so for everyone to leave it, there isn't really an alternative that's like a true like alternative L1 that people would move to. The other thing about Ethereum is they might be slow because they're a little conservative. Like they don't want to be on the exact bleeding edge, but at the same time they do evolve, right? So when proof of stake was like shown to work on lots and lots of other chains, then they deployed it, right? And now they have new solutions that make layer 2s run faster, and there's more stuff like coming down in the pipeline, and so I think that Ethereum will never lag too far behind the bleeding edge. So they might not ever be right on the bleeding edge, but they always are trying to stay, just within one or two steps of that bleeding edge. And so I think that combined with the network effect means that I would suspect that there'll probably be a dominant player, or at least some chain that's compatible with it. It doesn't have to strictly be Ethereum layer 1. It might be a layer 2, or it might be an EVM compatible like kind of chain. I also think EVM is probably going away by Ethereum themselves. I think eventually they'll replace it with WASM or something else like that. But in terms of investment, so this is like use, which is what I care about. But the mainstream public, care more about like token value and investing and things like that. And their Bitcoin is like the Ethereum. I think it's actually like the fact that Ethereum's value hasn't risen is in part because people actually use it. And when you use it, like you use it for gas fees and things like that, you don't want like something that's accruing in value because you're scared to use it. Like, why spend it on gas when tomorrow it's going to be worth twice as much, kind of thing, right? And so currencies tend not to have this like behavior where yeah. So I don't know, like no one can really give you a good story about why prices do what they do. But I think the fact that Bitcoin sort of peeled away from Ethereum in value is maybe at least partly explained by the fact that people actually use Ethereum, whereas most people just sit on their Bitcoin, they hoard it, and they don't actually use the network for anything.
And in terms of like onboarding students and developers, so if you were onboarding new developers to Web3, what would be the key concepts that you would want them to understand first?
So I guess it depends. So now it's like the ecosystem is big enough that you have lots of different specialized roles, right? So you can be a developer, but you don't have to be a developer. You could be the person that thinks about the protocols. You're the person that works out the game theory of the protocols. You can be a graphic designer. You could be the marketing person. So there's a lot of different skill sets. And I don't know that like, I think like for any one position, I think like the blockchain specific knowledge is like maybe 10% on top of like a strong base of 90% of just whatever. Like if you're a developer, you need know how to develop code. You need software engineering. Do you know Solidity? Yes or no? Well, that's like 10% on the top, right? Like you do have to learn it, and that's a skill that you're going to have to acquire. But I would sooner take someone that knows all about software engineering, but they know it in the context of, I don't know, C++, and teach them Solidity, as opposed to take someone who knows everything about Solidity, but doesn't know anything about software engineering practices. They don't know how to work on a team. They don't know how to, manage code or anything like that, and try and teach them that like bulk of knowledge, right? So that's sort of how I think about it. So whatever area you're in, whatever your discipline is, don't get stressed out about the blockchain specific details. Like just try and be the best at that, and then the blockchain stuff you can learn on top. Yeah, but then in terms of what is that 10%, if we're more like on the computer science side, so a lot of it's development type of stuff. So learning like languages that are specific for smart contracts like Solidity are good. Learning the stack, like so the EVM that sits under it's going to run your code, and understanding the quirks of EVM code. Other CS people do stuff like more like data, like measurements and things like that. And so, maybe you want to spend your time learning, I don't know, SQL and using Dune Analytics or a tool like that. So yeah, there's different, it depends sort of, there's different specialized roles. So like what exactly you learn is going to differ.
And on your end and with the students you work with, like, are there specific training resources or tools like Dune Analytics? Like, are there any tools that you would suggest people look into?
Yeah, so we like things that are open and free to use. And so my students basically do one of two things. They either they develop code, they write smart contracts, or they're doing some sort of data analytic kind of stuff. That I think subsumes like almost all the students that do stuff. Or they're doing some like protocol stuff where it's not tool specific. It's just thinking about the math and the cryptography itself. So in terms of development, use whatever platform you want. If you like VS Code, use VS Code. If you like Emacs, use Emacs. Solidity there's going to be tools that plug in Solidity, for all the different IDEs. So yeah, you can just go with whatever you want. On the data analytics side, so I am actually a huge fan of Do. I use it a lot for myself. It isn't exactly free, so it's kind of a freemium model. Students may use they might just get the blockchain data dumped into BigQuery and use that instead. Or we run at Concordia, we have like a Ethereum archive node, and so that also dumps stuff out in a database format that they can use whatever language they want to. Or I think there's different ways to configure different outputs from that. So yeah, so there's no yeah, I don't have any particular brands or tools to plug. It's actually a testament to how good the industry is because everything's composable, and so you can use the tools that you're comfortable with and just get the little plugins or whatever that make them blockchain specific.
And is there any training material or tools that is missing that you would like to see in the future, or it's pretty much okay right now?
So I think there's a plethora of training stuff. It's not my exact specialty. You might think I'm the university professor, so I know all about training. We do train, but we train at kind of a different level. So we're a lot more concerned with you getting solid on the fundamentals and things like that, rather than specific languages and things like that. So on the academic side, it's good. There's great resources on almost any subtopic. There's always gaps. There's always room for someone to go a little bit deeper or explain it a little more thoroughly and those types of things. So there definitely there's work to be done for sure. But it's not there's a glaring area where almost nobody's written about this. And then on the developer side, everything that my students have tried to use, they don't really have a problem finding support if they need it. Another thing that's great about the community too is if you do use some sort of kind of fringe project or something, I'll give you an example. Very early, some of my students, two of my students started using Arbitrum. So Arbitrum now is it's the biggest, I think, L2, and probably more transactions go on through Arbitrum than go through Ethereum itself at this point. But it wasn't always like that. They used to have a team of 15, 20 people. I kind of knew the founders, or I knew the founders. We wrote some papers together. So when my students wanted something to do, and Ethereum wasn't cutting it, I'm like, well, why don't you try this Arbitrum thing, right? But the point is that at that point, the documentation wasn't great, because it was early days. The technology was still evolving. But what they could do, and this is true of almost all the blockchain projects, is Arbitrum runs a Discord, or Off-Chain Labs has a Discord. And so they went on. The company's still small enough, and so you're actually talking to the developers directly, right? And they answer your questions. And honestly, it's probably quicker to just ask than to try and, go through the documentation and things like that. So that's another thing I really like about the community is almost all projects have somewhere you can hang out and you can talk to developers and get the help one-on-one that you need, or maybe there's other people hanging out there that understand the protocol.
And that would be in the Discord or Telegram channels, I assume?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And is there any YouTuber or podcast that you listen to that is more technical, that dive deep in this type of stuff? Or
yeah, so on YouTube, I subscribe to all sorts of more academic channels. So there's a bunch of channels that specialize in content. So it's usually, I don't know great names off the top of my head, but for example, there's a big group out of Cornell Tech. It involves a bunch of universities called IC3. So they have channels and they always do events and they're posting things. There's one at Berkeley and Stanford. I forget if they're separate or sometimes they do things jointly with Berkeley. So they all have their kind of blockchain channels. And then there's certain conferences that I'll follow. I'll subscribe to the feed for that conference. And so this is getting me a lot of kind of academic content. And then podcasts, the two I listen to there's one called ZK Podcast. So it specializes on zero knowledge, but it covers more blockchain, broader blockchain projects. They also run workshops a lot, and they have a lot of talks and stuff. So their YouTube channel is just full of stuff. And in that particular area of zero knowledge, I'll be oh, how does this thing work? And then there'll be some video from 4 years ago when like the person who designed it, is talking for the very first time to a public audience about it. So that's a great resource. And then I really like the A6EZ crypto. I think it's Web3. I forget exactly what the podcast is called, but that's another one that I listen to.
And what kind of innovation that you think is missing right now? Like what type of use case of using blockchain technology that is missing that you would like to see in the future?
So the one that I'm probably most interested in, I understand why it doesn't exist, and there's tons of people that are trying to make it exist, is I call it people call it synthetics, but it's basically like you have a stable coin. It's kind of like a blockchain representation of a US dollar or a Canadian dollar, right? And so it's the same idea applied to any financial product, like a stock. So you have a tokenized Google shares, or you tokenize, whatever, like US Treasury bills or that type of thing. And so I think for the same reason that stablecoins caught on, I think there's huge potential for these types of things. And we have a lot of plumbing, like we have interesting, lending protocols and exchange protocols and all sorts of things in DeFi. But the problem is that like you can only use them with crypto tokens. And crypto markets, I mean, not to disrespect it, but, it's highly speculative, very volatile. And some people like it, but a lot of people don't necessarily like it. And so I think there's a lot of room to, take other kinds of assets, safer asset classes, and push them through these tools. And I think there's a lot of people that would be interested in that kind of thing. Now, regulators may not like that because there's also not going to be a lot of consumer protection. Right. So with DeFi, you can just, you can't just go and start, investing, without becoming an accredited investor and things like that. And that's meant to protect you as an investor so you don't lose all your money. And so that's the kind of flip side of it. But anyways, I think that space is probably the space that's most interesting to me at the moment.
And the synthetics, is it like what they also call real world asset tokenization, essentially?
Yeah, exactly. It's the same. So it's a subset of that. Yeah. So real world assets could be like your house, real estate, that type of thing. And then, and synthetics, sometimes that term might actually prescribe how you do it. It's not merely what it is, but it may have a tinge of how you do it, and how you do it might not be the same as how you do a stable coin. So like most stable coins, it's like Tether or Circle, where you just have a company, they buy a bunch of US dollars and then they issue the tokens against it. So that's like the one model for doing it. Synthetics sometimes means that you have a price feed. So you don't have a company that owns the tokens. It's just that they know the price of it relative to US dollars. And then they try and give you an asset that matches the price. So it's a synthetic version of it. And that's actually less interesting. I think the big use case would be just for a company like Tether to start buying shares of companies and issuing tokens against them.
Yeah. And if you had do you have any ideas or to suggest students to build as like their prototype for their school project?
Yeah. So the school projects, they're a little difficult. Well, there's two types of things that you can do. So you could try to build something from scratch. But across the course is only 4 months, and you have exams and lectures and all that type of stuff. And so it's hard to really do a great job, even if you're on a team. So usually the projects that come in are little small things. They're usually not like innovative. They might be just taking something that somebody's already done, but just doing it for themselves so that they learn. And it's less about the idea, and it's more about the the execution of the idea and learning all the tools and things like that. So that's the first kind of project. The second kind of project would be the kind of thing I would do with a grad student. And so that could be a longer term thing. We're aiming for an academic paper. It might take a year or something to do. There, you're trying to do highly innovative kinds of things, but it's really hard to find those topics because they're very niche, and you have to be the first one to think of something that someone hasn't done. But they exist. But anyways, you can, it's a challenge. And then the third type of project that I actually advocate for students is, instead of doing something from scratch, take a project that already exists, it's open source, and just add a feature to it. And that's like a different skill set. That's like, going in and finding some code base that's too huge. You're never going to understand it. You're never going to be able to read it. But being able to find the right place to insert your little change and then doing the change. And even better, if you can go through their issues page on GitHub and pick something that they actually want implemented, then you might actually see your change, go live on the system. But I think that's like a more sensible. Both of them are sensible. One is about really teaching you everything, but at a certain point, you have to try that kind of project too, where you're going into a large code base and you're just trying to change one little aspect of the system.
One of the ideas you mentioned, like just going into an existing project, looking into their GitHub and the functionalities and like trying to add a feature. Sometimes developers, they wonder like, how can I start in this industry? Well, I think that's a good way to start. Like just find a project you like, start working with them and trying to contribute. And then if they like what you do, then they might hire you or something like that. So I think that's a good way to like join the industry and show basically what you're capable of. And
yeah, I agree 200%. And I've had students that have literally done that. Like they've gone early on projects. They were just doing research on it. They were hanging out on Discord and talking. And then guess what? Like all of a sudden they're hiring software engineers. Who are they going to ask? Right? How about the student that's been there 6 months asking you questions and you know that they know the system based on the questions and you've read the research paper?
Sometimes it's hard for students that get out of school and they don't have much of a pedigree of stuff they built or like their resume is not like very good. I find like doing that is like the best thing you can do, essentially. Like just start contributing and then they will see your value. You don't need to have any past experience or whatever. If they like what you do now, they won't even look at your resume. They just will want to hire you. So I think that's like a great way to start.
Yeah. I couldn't say it better myself. I agree. That's like the best way. And even if that company doesn't hire you, like you'll have something to show for yourself. Like, oh, I made this feature. I put it here, like kind of thing. And so, yeah. And there's nothing holding you back too, right? You don't have to be hired already. I mean, the money, like you're doing it on a volunteer basis, so it's unpaid. But other than that, like there's nobody stopping you from contributing.
Is there any specific idea that you would like to see built? Like, I don't know, there's like these RWAs, synthetics, NFT platforms. Like, is there any like a few ideas that you could share like for students to build?
Ooh. Let me think. I usually have like 10 ideas of things. I can't think of concrete ideas. What we usually do is I'll give you kind of like how we think of ideas rather than the exact ideas. But like we spend a lot of time thinking about like pain points for users. So like for example, like layer 2, you move your tokens, you bridge them over into a layer 2, and then you want to bridge them back to layer 1 Ethereum. And it's an optimistic roll up, so you have to wait 7 days. That's like a pain point, right? And so then we'll sit and we'll say, well, do you really have to wait 7 days? Like, is there any other thing that we could possibly do, right? And so then we would like try and work on something. So that's like one project that one of my students did. Or once you draw it down to layer 1, then, or even going the other direction, once you bridge, if you want to move it or take it out of the bridge, you need gas. You have to pay gas, and to have gas, you need money. But like the reason you were bridging your money there was to fund your wallet, but you can't have your wallet funded until you withdraw from the bridge, but you need a funded wallet in order to pay the gas to withdraw, kind of thing. So you get stuck in this like kind of this problem. And so like that's the kind of thing too. It'd be like, okay, is there a gasless withdrawal? Could you do some sort of meta transaction or whatever? And like so, but the philosophy underlying it is just like this is a pain point for users, and like how do we solve?
I agree. I experienced that this morning actually. Was trying to withdraw some funds from a wallet on chain, and then I didn't have the gas token for that protocol. So I'm like, what? Well, why is it not working? And then I'm trying to search where can I buy that token? And then you need to have an account on specific exchanges. So I was lucky to have an account. But in the case that you don't, like there would be some demand, I guess, for a service that would pay for your transaction. Like every account can get one transaction free, and then the foundation of that protocol funds that initiative or something like that. I think that would be very valuable for sure.
Yeah. And the crazy thing is you have the money there, like it's just not in the right format, right? And so it's like you have the money to pay for it. It's just, yeah. And so there are solutions. So there are companies that are trying to do stuff in that space. But anyways, and there's this thing called meta transactions that lets you, like Polymarket's an example. Right now I'm really into prediction markets, and they have one where you can do a gasless withdrawal, but you kind of relay it to another party, and then they take their cut out of it.
Yeah, makes so much sense because the hassle sometimes is worth the fee. So it's a good model. And what would be like the best practices or common pitfalls when you're building on a certain protocol or Web3?
Yeah, so there's a couple, I guess. So the first is to understand, like, go back to the fundamentals of blockchain. Like they're not magic, they don't do everything, and there's certain things that they're really bad at. So like one would be like just long executions. So like if you can't do something immediately, like say you have to search through a list of things, like it's never gonna work. It doesn't know anything about anything that's happening off chain, right? So it doesn't know who won the election, for example, using the prediction market example. And we have Oracle services and things like that, but you have to pull that data in. Smart contract won't wake itself up and do something, right? It only is going to work if someone sends a transaction to it. So there's certain things that, like, especially if you're coming from like cloud or something that like seems kind of comparable, where like cloud apps can do it, but blockchain just can't do it. So that's like kind of a first thing. The whole like, so I didn't spend a lot of time talking about Web3, which would be to me kind of like the website that sits on top of your smart contract. So that's another whole like thing, right? Like you're building, it's also a different toolkit, right? So like a lot of like Node.js and like that kind of stuff. And so you're building this web entity that sits on it, but it has to talk to the blockchain in order to pull data, right? And so you're going through Infura or something like that to pull the data in. And then users aren't logging into your website anymore. They have their MetaMask, which is sitting in a browser extension, and now you're going to connect yourself, the website to their wallet. And it's just like a very different model than Web2, right? Like the data isn't there, it's somewhere else, and you're kind of siphoning it through an API, and the authentication isn't there, and the user account isn't exactly there either. So that's also another like kind of pitfall where I think where people go in with a strong Web2 model and they don't really understand that Web3 is like very different in terms of kind of how it's organized. But the whole Web3 model also is another thing that I think is really interesting about blockchain is just like it's a very, very different way of doing user accounts and doing authentication. And even if you're not interested in doing some blockchain specific thing with it, that model might be interesting for other kinds of things like just identity on the web or other things like that.
And you mentioned earlier that like a solution for students would also be like to start from an existing project or an open source prototype. Is there any place or website that people can go to find these templates or like starter kit or prototypes? What's the best way to find them, basically?
Yeah, so you mean like a young project that's sort of in the startup stages, or do you mean more of like code that hasn't been filled in yet and you want to fill it in?
Let's say I'm a student, I want to build a project, but I don't want to start from scratch. I want to start from something that has already been like tested or started, essentially.
Yeah, I don't think there is like a common repository for all those types of things, but usually you just Google like kind of what you want to do, and then you'll find yourself on GitHub and you'll find a repository there, and that's like one approach. So one approach is like to fork some existing code. The other thing that is useful, usually used in combination, would be like pulling a library that's going to do a bunch of the stuff that you wanted to do. And so that's where you could find a repository. Like you can find all sorts of libraries for things, and where that repository is will depend on what it is that you're trying to do. But if you're trying to do like some, I don't know, ERC specific like standard thing, then like something like OpenZeppelin would have like a lot of those libraries. And if you want libraries for Web3 layer, they'll be somewhere else. But that's where you can probably find like some repositories that have lots of existing code as libraries that you can call. But then the best thing would be to find a project that's sort of close to what you want. And if it's permissioned correctly, like in terms of open source licenses, then you could potentially just fork it and use their code base.
And as a developer, like how do you stay aware of what's coming and all the improvements in terms of tooling? Like, do you like just follow the protocol foundations on Twitter? Like, is there any other place to stay up to date with all that though?
Sure. So first, a caveat: I'm not actually a developer. Like I would say my students are more the developer. So like but I do a lot of like trying to stay on top of knowledge. For me, it's more staying on top of academic knowledge. And so for me, that's like following conferences and papers and things like that. And then in terms of like the bleeding edge on development side, yeah, it's more the students themselves. And just because like students come in young and, and so hopefully they leave like just a little bit older, not too old. But they know, like, I don't know, they keep up with current things. So I don't know how exactly they stay on top of things, but the students that are coming in now are, I don't know, programming in Rust, whereas like 10 years ago, they were programming in Java or C++ or something. And I don't know why they switched, but like, they're just part of that sort of culture. And somehow they're like, yeah, they follow the zeitgeist of like whatever's going on. So I don't try and stay on top of that stuff myself personally. I just leave it to the students.
And what are the exciting things that are coming in this industry that are exciting to you and you're looking forward to?
I like the whole zero knowledge space. I think that's probably the most interesting space. And I usually tell my students now, like, if you want to do something in the space, like maybe work on that. There's a lot of like innovation and well, first off, there's a lot of academically interesting ideas, but in terms of practical ideas, I really like projects where they kind of like pull data in a way that you can modify the data or show parts of the data, but you can still prove that it's like real. So some concrete examples would be, like the government of Canada is probably not going to give you a digital driver's license, right? But I can log into the government of Canada website, or say the Quebec government where I am. I could log in and they might show my driver's license number on a website. And then I look at the website, I'm like, oh, there's a little lock. And that lock means that, in effect, it was kind of digitally signed by the government when it was sent to me. The cryptography is a little more complicated, so that's like subtly not correct. But there is some integrity, cryptographic level integrity on the fact that the Quebec government is showing me this particular driver's license in this name. And if I could somehow just like wrap that up into a credential, then I could carry it around and show it to whoever. And it's just like the Quebec government signed that piece of information. So I think that space is interesting. You can do similar things with email. So anytime you can get anyone to email you anything, and then you could wrap it up into like a little piece of identity. And then you could show it to people and prove that, oh, this is, this came from this company or this government organization or those types of things. So that's one space I think has a lot of potential. Yeah. And then the privacy space is also interesting. I think there's still a lot of work to be done. People kind of got scared off, I think, with, Tornado Cash and that kind of stuff. And that's like anonymity. So that's like one aspect. But there's other aspects too. Like, for example, you run a smart contract, everything's in the open. Like everyone can see everything, right? Maybe you want to have a smart contract where user accounts are protected, or you can transfer values, but you still prove properties like the service isn't making money up, or it doesn't have a bunch of fraudulent accounts or things like that. And so I think that's another interesting area of like how to add privacy on top of contracts and have private smart contracts and those types of things.
Yeah, because like blockchains are all public and open, so and businesses, they need to protect all the user data, all the private stuff. So I agree, like ZK is like super important for business applications, I guess, of blockchain technology. So can you explain like in a bit more detail, what is ZK actually?
Sure. So ZK is like, there's first off, it comes in two flavors. So there's a flavor which is just like, I do some computation and the inputs to the computation, and I'm telling you what the output is, and the computation that I'm doing. So it might be like, for example, I went and downloaded the whole Bitcoin blockchain and I verified every block, right? And I want to convince you of the fact that the current block is true. It's valid. So the only way that you could convince yourself originally is you would have to do the work yourself. You would have to also download it and check it all. And so what a ZK proof is basically me just proving to you that it's true without you having to do the work yourself. And modern ZK, which are sometimes called snarks, they just promise that the proof is going to be smaller. The amount of time you spend verifying the proof is going to be way smaller than the amount of time you spend doing the computation, right? So it's basically, if you can find a friend who will do the computation for you and give you a proof, then you can just believe the proof instead of having to replicate the information yourself. So that's snarks. And then the zero knowledge aspect, the ZK snarks, it's the exact same concept, but you start mixing secret data in. So now it's like I couldn't even do the computation myself because I don't have access to the secret information. So what the person will do is they'll do a computation. They'll tell you all the constraints on the computation. They'll just give you the output, and then they'll give you a certificate or a proof that proves that this is the actual output. So, for example, if I wanted to prove to you that, say I'm a business and I want to prove to you that I have a bunch of Ether and I'm not telling you which addresses are mine, but I want to prove to you that I have at least $1 million worth of ETH, right? So I could do that as a zero knowledge proof. So my secret keys would be the input to the proof, right? That proves that I know which keys are mine. The public keys are also secret. You don't learn the public keys, but you do learn that whatever public keys I'm using, I do know the secret keys, and they do exist somewhere on the Ethereum blockchain. And if you were to go look up the balances of those addresses, they would sum up to this particular value. Yeah. So I could convince you that I have, $1 million, which might be enough to satisfy like my liabilities or whatever. Yeah. So that's like the kind of thing that you can build, but they're very general and you can build them for anything that you can compute. Yeah. And now the technology also, like I'd say in the last 5 years, especially, a lot of money has gone into companies building tools. And so now you don't even have to understand zero knowledge or how it works. You're just given a programming language. It's a little more constrained than just an arbitrary programming language. But if you can code up what you want to prove in that language, that constrained language, you press a button and then it spits out a snark. And then you press another button and it spits out a solidity contract that will verify that snark. And like, that's it. That's all you do type of thing. So, so that's also interesting to students, is like learning that zero knowledge language and learning that whole toolkit and how to compile them and then finding the bugs in the contracts or like the proofs that you're doing and things like that.
And if let's say you were a young student and you're just finishing your university and you're starting your career in Web3, like where would you start and what would you start going essentially?
So I'll repeat back to you what you told me actually, which is I would go look through the space. I would find something that I'm personally interested in, right? So like I love prediction markets. I don't know why, but I love that space, right? So I'd be like, okay, is anyone doing decentralized prediction markets? And maybe you like sports, maybe you like, identities. I don't like whatever you think is interesting and you could work on. There'll be some decentralized version of that, right? And then you find a project and one that's open source and has a Discord or a Telegram or whatever. And then you just start working on it and, give yourself, 6 months or whatever, if you can afford it, right? If you can afford to work unpaid, then give yourself 6 months to just, read through the code, understand it, try and make some contributions, talk to the team and things like that. And even you can't like go in thinking, oh, they're going to hire me. Like that might not work. Right. But you are thinking that I'm going to learn something that I could put on a resume and I can take to another Web3 company and say that, oh, I know the people at this team and this is some of the stuff that I did.
Like prediction markets, ZK, and like synthetics, RWAs. I find like all these niche subjects inside the Web3 have so much potential in the next few years. Like any student that is getting very interested in those subjects would for sure find a great paying job in the future, I guess.
100%. And the more niche, the better, right? If there's only one company or 3 companies doing it, like if you jump on something that like, that's sort of past its peak and now there's like hundreds of companies, that's maybe not the best kind of project. So if you can find something that there's more than 0 people working on it in the world, but there's less than 100 people, then that's the sweet spot.
All right. We went through most of the questions I had prepared. Now I would wanted just to leave the floor to you. Basically, is there anything that you would want to say to students that are going to build a project on Web3?
So I think we covered everything. I can't really think of much that would, but else that I would say.
Well, is there any way first to reach you on your socials? Like, how can people reach you? Also, is there any opportunity with you, like having postgraduate students join you for some stuff, or like what are the opportunities with you or at the university you work at?
Sure. So first off, I just have a website, pupspy.com. You could just Google my name and blockchain or something like that, and it will come up, or Montreal. And I'm sort of on X, but I don't really use it that much, and I'm not really on any other socials. Yeah, so with students, first off, if anyone wants to do an actual graduate degree, we have a graduate program. You can do a master's in security. It can be a thesis-based, like supervised kind of project, or it could be a course-based where you take a lot of courses. It's not blockchain specific. It would be all of cryptography and security, but blockchain would be one of the courses that you could take, and I'll offer a zero knowledge course as well. If you wanted to just informally take the course, all my courses are on my website. They're just like YouTube videos and things like that. And so you could do a course, like just audit a course if you wanted.
And that's free, like students could just watch the videos?
Yeah. So it's completely open for at least the 2 courses, actually 3 courses that I taught. So there's a cryptography course. There's no videos. It's just audio. There's a blockchain course. There are videos. They're on YouTube. And then there's a one called security evaluation. And it's also just on YouTube, but it's recordings of me teaching in class kind of thing. But yeah. And then hopefully we have a textbook coming out soon on Ethereum as well. So that's something that's in the works. There's a Bitcoin textbook that I wrote the foreword to. Some colleagues at Princeton wrote it. That's also free PDF. So those are good resources if you want to learn a bit more. If you're interested in research, I do research projects. I have one that I did. My most recent project was with just someone that I knew from the blockchain community, not a student kind of thing. And so I'm open to like those kinds of collaborations as well. So if you wanted to do like more of a research kind of project, you don't have to have an explicit relationship with Concordia. You can just, anyone can write papers together and work on stuff together. And so usually I always have like lots of projects that are ongoing. So if there's something anyone's interested in that specifically, just shoot me an email, and I'm happy to talk through it at least, and maybe have a couple of calls and just see what's there in terms of what could be done.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time, Jeremy. I think this was great feedback for all the young developers that will listen to it. And thank you so much. Hopefully this will help a lot of people.
It's a pleasure being here. Yeah.